And they spent a good time in their teen years there in Boston, and then Alice went her way. She got married to a Chinese nationalist Air Force pilot by the name of Terry, who had come to America after the Second World War to promote, war bonds and all that stuff, and China-American friendship with the nationalists and stuff. And she got to know him and like him, and they were a pretty good partnership in which you financed Alice's education. It was education in which she met both Robert Graves and Carl Jung, way before they had become popular. Graves in Mallorca and Jung in Switzerland. And she came back with some insights that she passed on to me that she had received from them, that in fact eventually helped me unravel both the myth and the figures and the voices. So it basically is that the the poem, or I would call it a myth, but it's in poem form, was, when it was finally unraveled with all of the rest of the stuff, pointed towards a prediction that a return to the dominance of the female spirit was going to occur. Alice was very big on this, and she had felt that for the past 2,000 years that the male spirit is like a yin and yang kind of thing, where logic and all the female gods disappeared, and in their place became the male gods, and the final end result of that is the scientific civilization in the West that we have today. That's a real shortcut, but she felt it had become unbalanced, and what I was receiving from the collective unconscious was a series of messages that was going to be corrected. And she was very drawn to it because her own thinking, she felt that was going to take place too. And she's not the only one. There seem to be many predictions and many psychic predictions. Time is always a problem in these. It's just never correct. It's always off to some degree. But that there was going to be a correction where the world of the self was going to yield to the world of the soul. Not as much as it had back in the days of the mother goddesses, which was in our tribal stages, but there was going to be a counterbalancing was going to take effect. And what the poem and the figure and everything had come to in fact announce through me, or through the poems that I had produced, through the long mythic poem, is that this was going to occur. And but in fact, as she later explained to me, as we started to actually discuss it, is that this is a long process, that these visions and these messages are, in fact, are going to occur to many people over a long period of time, and that the process is never sudden. People think these cultural changes are in fact going to occur immediately, like in the year 2012 or whatever. It just goes on and on. But they take place very gradually, and that the signs become apparent through many, many people, hundreds and thousands of people, really, when you get down to it over a period of time. And what happens is that the culture eventually starts to resolve itself, and it tends to move in a different direction, so that our consciousness moves slightly away from a self-absorbed rational consciousness to one that's more balanced between soul and self, where intuition plays a role along with reason. So that was the final untanglement of the series of psychic events and the poem. And it's a long, involved thing because it was never immediately apparent to either of us exactly what was going on, and it was a kind of journey of discovery over the last 5 years that finally allowed us to put it together and to make some sense of it. So that the the novel is really, it's a mystery story, basically, that starts with a series of psychic events, and then through the help of people like Joan Adley and Diane Randall and Jane Washington and Alice Hickey, and even surprisingly through people like Pinga Dentista, who was always amused by the whole thing. He thought it was funny. That piece by piece, the puzzle was unraveled as Alice and I had traveled between the Keys and Sarasota and Panama and Mexico. So that it's a novel that moves very quickly, and it moves on many levels as an adventure story. It has its humorous moments because to me that's how life is, and it has its very serious moments because we have to take these things that happen to us in these sudden appearances of the unconscious that make themselves visible. We have to take them seriously, although trying to determine exactly what they mean is always a puzzle. But I think at this stage I've come to resolve it is that it's one more indication that the culture is going to move. How it's going to move and when and what exact form it's going to take, we don't know, but we think it will be more intuitive and more in the female spirit, balancing what we would call the male spirit. It's like a yin and yang kind of thing, that I think that just about covers it, but I would also mention, if you want to know more about Alice Hickey, she was very private, by the way. I have just one picture of her that she gave me when she was about 12, I guess, and she gave me a picture of her home. They're all black and whites out in the Arcadia direction. You can see the flat top truck there, but we used to drive around in that before the police. We were always hoping that, in fact, the police weren't around because there was so much exhaust coming out of it. It looked like it was a space shuttle taking off. But her son Christopher Hickey has a blog about his early years with his mother, obviously from the time he was a babe until he grew up. He has some other pictures of Alice there, and he has some interesting things to say about her as a psychic, and he also has some of her notebooks there. She had an extensive collection of notebooks. She was one of the few psychics I've met who was highly organized and who was as academic and as probing as somebody like Carl Jung. She was the genuine article, and at the same time, she had a very rigid logic to her. So you couldn't get much past Alice. She was a piece of work. She has since gone off with her husband Terry, who she was divorced from, but who, at the age of their late 70s, got together with him again, and they're off to a suburb outside of Shanghai where she lives with him. He's from Shanghai, and so it's one of those late romances, I guess. They were always a pair. It's just that things didn't work out in the middle years for them. So she was kind of living a monastic life when I met her, but that resolved itself, thank God. And I think that part of that resolving of her life itself, came in our search to find out what these things meant, because her own intuitions as to what was happening were in fact involved in my own, meaning that she saw the things that were happening to me as a indication or a kind of justification of what she felt was going to happen through signs that had been coming to her. So we were drawn very closely together by those, and in trying to untangle those, part of her own personal life became untangled. So it was interesting. I say also, if you want to download the book, there's a PDF I mentioned. I'm going to give it to you. What the address is again. You can go to it and you can download it before it gets published. And I think that's about all that I think I'd like to say about it at this stage. I think if you want to catch the full flavor of the book, you should just read it. It's very easy reading, by the way. It moves very quickly.